Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Weather Center Nazario. Today is October 12th, 2023, and I don't even know where to begin with this one. There's a lot of very crucial information that I need to communicate to each and every one of you watching this, both to the people here in the southeastern United States, especially Central Florida. You can see I have National Weather Service radar pulled up, and we're still seeing isolated instances of pretty significant thunderstorm activity. This has persisted all throughout the evening yesterday through the early morning hours of today, and it is still ongoing as of now. I also have very, very critical information to relay for those of you who may be watching from the Caribbean, the Lesser Antilles, and parts of the Greater Antilles, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and even portions of Jamaica, Eastern Cuba. Really need to pay close attention to what the information I have to present to you guys here towards the back end of this segment. Starting off right now, though, we had numerous instances of tornadic activity, funnel clouds, waterspouts, and tornadoes on the ground reported both along the west and eastern coastlines of the Central Florida Peninsula. The tornado threat has diminished quite a bit, but you can still see that there's some isolated convective indices within this band of precip that we're realizing on the backside of that entity that moved its way across the southeast over the last 24 30 hours. I walked outside this morning and you couldn't begin to describe how unstable the air felt. It was very hot, very dense. You could feel the humidity in the air. The winds were already blowing, a clear indication to that low-level warm sector jet that's helping to supply that southerly flow and get these updrafts spinning, producing a lot of the tornadoes we saw along the coastline. This is likely to continue as we go into the overnight hours of tonight, but I can tell you right now that the tornado threat is going to continue to diminish as this low-pressure center can work its way further into the Atlantic, approaching Bermuda as it begins to deepen down and possibly obtain a subtropical or tropical storm status for that matter. We're going to start to see more consistent environmental flow across Florida, across the southeast, and with that cooler, drier air to the north coming down, that kind of helped mix things together and further induce this tornadic activity we saw throughout much of the overnight hours of this morning. That's going to be completely evacuated from our AOR, and we should be able to rest assured tonight knowing the worst is finally over. All right, so we're going to get right down to business because, guys, I really need to get this across to you. I want you to, as weird as this may sound, I don't want you paying a whole lot of attention to what National Hurricane Center has on their website right now. They have a 40% chance of development for this system over the next 7 days and about 10% over the next 48 hours. That makes sense with what we're visually seeing on satellite imagery. And if you look downstream of this system, Tropical Storm Sean has made a little bit of redemption over the last 8 to 12 hours, originally weakening to a tropical depression overnight last night because of the heavily sheared environment he's found himself in. The reason I bring this up is because if you look at this projected window of movement, it has become of great concern that I communicate to you guys what could possibly happen to our Lesser Antilles and parts of Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic as this system really begins to get its act going and potentially become either Tammy and or Major Hurricane Vince. I'm calling it right now. I'm going to make sure that that is the emphasis I put into this video. It looks like a lot of our model data as of 12 Zulu this afternoon indicate the potential of a major hurricane, no longer just a Category 1 or 2 hurricane moving through our Lesser Antilles, and I need you to understand immediately the emphasis and the urgency I'm putting into this message, guys. So here we go. We're looking at the North Atlantic Tropical AOR on our European model. This is the 12Z, and I'm going to start us off with 12 Zulu yesterday so you can get an idea of how much things have changed today. You go towards the back end of the run and you can start to see indications in the pressure down there as you get closer to the Lesser Antilles that maybe we begin to start seeing a low-end tropical storm or an organized tropical depression pushing through our windward islands and continuing off into the western portions of the Caribbean. If you switch over to 12Z today, I haven't changed the panel, guys. There's a 929 Category 4, borderline Category 5 hurricane to the north of Puerto Rico, having made landfall in Puerto Rico for that matter. You go through the loop, we're at 72 hours out, you can see resemblance of a low pressure beginning to form in our central main development region. And as you track this through time, guys, we're expecting rapid intensification out of this entity. You can see it already going below 1,000 millibars as early as the 18th of October. And then as you get closer to the Lesser Antilles, it very rapidly begins to strengthen into a major hurricane on the Euro. And there's really no other way for this thing to track, because if you look to the north, all this dark orange is high pressure. That's high pressure coming off of the United States in response to what we have undergoing cyclogenesis right now over the Great Plains to create some severe weather havoc for most of our Midwestern and upper upper Midwestern states as I'm making this video. We're not going to cover that right now, and I do apologize for that because this is very critical information for our folks out there in the Caribbean islands, particularly the Antilles and portions of Puerto Rico, and they need to get this message. They need it right now. As you get towards the very tail end of the run, you can see about a 950 to a 955 millibar hurricane rolling through our Lesser Antilles, beginning to move more to the north as it deepens down further into a 939 millibar hurricane before moving right over top the area of Puerto Rico and then continuing to strengthen as it gets to the north of all of our Caribbean nations, running up against this next nor'easter system that's expected to impact the northeast. You can see a 972 millibar low off the Nova Scotia coastline with an associated frontal boundary right in through here. That's what's luckily going to prevent this system from traveling any further to the west and recurve it back out to sea, and it should miss Bermuda for that matter as well. As that system continues to propagate to the east, that frontal force field, if you will, is going to continue to move to the east and allow this system to bounce backwards into the central Atlantic, no longer hopefully posing a threat to anybody. Some of our long-range ensembles have it kind of just dawdling around out there until something else can pick it up and move it back to the west-northwest. That's way too far out. It's not even on the European run at this time, so we're not going to talk about that. Right now, I really need you to understand that we went from 0 to 100 quite literally with what the Euro and our other model platforms, for that matter, are depicting with this storm. We're looking at both the Icon on the left-hand side and the Korean model on the right-hand side, because the Icon was the one who first started to instigate some pretty good development out of that Invest 94 area. The Korean model was in close proximity to what the Euro model was indicating for the last couple of days. A tropical depression and maybe starting to get its act together into tropical storm status as it began to work its way into the eastern Caribbean. If you track this out through time and you look at both models at the same time, you can see Tropical Storm Sean dwindling as it gets picked up by all that jet energy and those strong winds associated with not only the jet and the cold air, but the frontal boundaries draped across northern portions of the Atlantic. If you watch Invest 94, it very quickly begins to deepen down on both models and rapidly strengthen as it approaches our Lesser Antilles areas. You can see a clear indication of a high-end tropical storm or a low-end hurricane impacting the Windward Islands directly on the KMA, and a very strong system on the Icon on the left-hand side, moving towards our Leeward Islands of the Lesser Antilles, still on its path towards the west-northwest, potentially impacting Puerto Rico as we saw in the Euro. And then what's also very interesting about the Icon is if you look further upstream, depending on who gets a name out there, we could either have Vince and or maybe our last name of the season, Whitney, on hot pursuit of whichever major hurricane this decides to come together as before it impacts the Lesser Antilles. So not only are we looking at exhausting our 2023 name list for that matter, but we could finally see something unprecedented for areas who were already afflicted by different storms earlier this year, but nothing to this magnitude. The Canadian model at 12 Zulu was also steadfast initially in its previous runs with developing Invest 94L. As you track this through time, you can see it quickly organizing into a tropical storm riding along the southern base of that 1020 high across the central Atlantic, moving right in as a Category 2 hurricane or approaching Category 2 strength, making it to that level of intensity as it begins to work its way towards Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico as a 970 millibar hurricane. And then you can also see on the Canadian model, we're expecting that nor'easter to kick off and really amplify the weather pattern across the mid-Atlantic northeastern coastline and possibly give us here in the southeast another round of severe El Nino style weather, but at the same token creating that frontal force field I mentioned to you guys, preventing this system from traveling all the way through the Caribbean and becoming a threat for Cuba, Jamaica, Cayman Islands, and inevitably the state of Florida. Looking at the most recent 12Z ensembles for the Euro as well, we have a tremendous amount of agreement that something major is coming towards our Lesser Antilles. As you go through time, there's the 18th and into the 19th of October, you can see just how many of our ensemble members are depicting somewhere in between 974 to sub 970 millibar center of pressure, moving through a lot of our Antille nations into the Greater Antilles before finally running up against that high pressure frontal system and ejecting out to sea. I'm also starting to notice a bit more agreement for something coming out of the Western Caribbean on the Euro. We'll look at the GFS here in a moment, but it's very interesting to suddenly see the Euro dialing up its member agreement for a secondary system, whether it be tropical or non-tropical, getting pulled in from the East Pac and up towards Cuba, the Cayman Islands, and maybe even the southern base of the Florida Peninsula. All right, move on to our 12Z GFS ensembles, and despite what the deterministic run is doing, the operational run, I'm not going to show you guys that. It is completely off the chain. It does nothing close to what the rest, and I mean the rest of every single one of our main models out there are doing in terms of not only out in the Atlantic, but in the Caribbean for that matter. But the ensembles I put just a little more faith into, so we're going to look at those. As you track this through time, you can see Tropical Storm Sean working its way into the AOR, and then finally you see all of our ensemble members peeking in for what could possibly be Hurricane Tammy at this point, albeit our ensembles on the GFS bring in a weaker system, thankfully, to our Lesser Antilles, but you can still see a tremendous amount of agreement that something is working its way to the west and is likely to impact somebody as it does so. I'm also noting, if you look out over our Western Caribbean as well, the 12Z GFS has really amplified how many members want to have something swinging out of the Caribbean up towards Cuba, the Cayman Islands, maybe even the Bahamas, the Florida Keys, or some sort of a southern Florida landfall. Now, I will caveat that by saying the last time the GFS indicated this far out, as we are seeing currently in the state of Florida, it was more of a non-tropical entity. If we didn't have that subtropical jet and the dry air digging in from up north, we would have definitely seen tropical cyclone formation in our Gulf of Mexico. That is an undoubtable truth. This case, because of the dynamics we have in place for our future storm, Invest 94, to organize and potentially rapidly intensify the way it is, we could see something more in the realm of tropical coming across the Western Caribbean out of the East Pacific and moving up to the north-northeast as it makes its approach towards the southeast United States. So definitely a huge AOR to watch here, guys. I've been obsessing over this all day today, and to tell you the truth, my brain is almost fried at this point, looking at all the moving pieces to this, looking at our large-scale weather features, the atmospheric environmental conditions that are in place, to help produce a major hurricane out there, and the things are definitely lining up. All the parameters are coming together, and that's why I'm trying to get across this level of urgency in this video. Last but not least, we're going to talk El Nino for the southeast because I'm noticing a continuous trend on both the Euro and the GFS. Tropical-wise, GFS throwing it out entirely. For CONUS in North America, I have a little bit more faith in it because I used to draw a lot of my synoptic analyses off of it, so I know it can handle synoptic scale frontal systems and jet-supported systems a little bit better than forming tropical cyclones. As you go towards that ever-anticipated dateline of October 20th through the 22nd, take a look at how the GFS wants to pull some moisture out of the Caribbean with that 1024 high over our mid-Atlantic states, the upper portions of the southeastern quadrant of the United States. As this does so, you're going to have all that warm air advection and tropical moisture coming out of the Western Caribbean surging north, and what really concerns me with this depiction of what could happen over the southeast is take a look over the United States. We have another frontal boundary making its way across the southern tier, across the southern plains, and if you look real closely, you can actually see some really good concentration in our isotherms, our thickness lines here, indicating that there is a large pocket of cold air working its way to the southeast that's going to interact with this huge plume of warm tropical moisture. In layman's terms, guys, it's like taking the dynamics you see over the Great Plains Tornado Alley and shifting it over the southeastern United States, which is why this also has my attention. We could maybe see even worse conditions than what we've observed here in the state of Florida over the last 12 to 18 hours. Just for further confirmation, you can see as that system really begins to get going in the Atlantic, I know this is the United States AOI, but you can see all that rigid cold air across the southeast creating that area of frontal activity or that force field, that blockade to stop what's brewing in the Atlantic from coming all the way through to a United States landfall. On the same token, that system begins to modify and lose a lot of its intensity and a lot of its cold air thickness, if you will. It modifies over the southeast and begins to retrograde off to the north and east just in time for another area of very potent cold air to come across the plains and head towards our general area of the U.S. If you look down over the Gulf, look at how much warm air we have surging to the north and that tremendous amount of temperature discontinuity we have going across the Gulf Coast, the Appalachian Mountains, the Ohio-Mississippi Valley, and further down into the southeast. This is a very, very textbook instance where we could see some very significant weather, to include tornadic activity, large hail, very powerful rotating updrafts with this scenario as it pushes through the southeast and into the Atlantic. And we could see a continue for the mid-Atlantic and the northeast as that system deepens down and begins to advect out before we get yet another round of intense cold air coming out of the Canadian provinces. So guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap the video there. I am internally tapped of any sort of brain power I could put further into this. I've been looking at it and scrutinizing it for the last 8 hours since I woke up this morning, maybe even a little longer than that as model data has started to populate. So we'll get back to you very soon. I may do another live stream later tonight. If not, you can definitely guarantee we're going to be live tomorrow at 8 p.m., Friday the 13th. I have a special surprise still in store for you guys, albeit the level of concern that I'm exhibiting going over all of these parameters. The key takeaway for this video, folks, is please, regardless of if you think it's hype, regardless of if you think it's fear-mongering, the data's there, the writing is on the wall. If you're watching this video, please start to communicate with anybody you may know who could watch in the Lesser Antilles, in the Caribbean, and even across the southeast United States as we brace for a potential second round of this kind of severe weather that we're witnessing right now with this low-pressure center that came out of the Gulf of Mexico and started to interact with our El Nino-induced subtropical jet across the southern tier United States. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me on this Thursday afternoon. I hope you have been safe throughout this weather event, and I hope for those of you across the greater United States are in place and safe and sound as we prepare for this new system coming out of the Colorado Rockies to deepen down and create another realm of severe weather in its wake. I'm definitely keeping everybody out there who's been affected by these storms in my thoughts, prayers, and that's exactly why I want to put so much intensity and energy into this video and communicate the best information that I can to the best of my ability to everybody who is gracious enough, I should say, to tune in and watch my content. We'll talk to you guys very soon. If you have any questions or comments, please drop me a line either on my Instagram, WXCenter_Nazario. Very happy to strike up a conversation with you. I will make sure to get back to you, or drop a comment below and we can have a conversation there offline. I really look forward to hearing from you guys. God bless you. We're in a very volatile situation right now, it goes without saying, and there's more to come. It looks like the second half of October could be pretty intense. Let's just put it to you that way. Until next time, guys, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.